There are love stories that don't need a perfect ending to become eternal. They once loved each other with everything they had, then parted ways like two shooting stars that only had time to streak across each other's skies for the briefest moment. But that moment, brilliant, tear-stained, and impossible to recreate, made me believe that the most beautiful kind of love is sometimes the one that remains unfinished. And this is the story I haven't been able to forget, even now. There are love stories that, even when left unfinished, still have the power to make us believe in miracles. Theirs began on a summer afternoon, simple, like countless other meetings. She was a senior literature student, he was a young photographer wandering from place to place in search of inspiration. They met at a photo exhibition, where she stood for a long time in front of a misty photograph of a woman with her back turned. The only question she asked when she met him was, did she ever turn around? He looked at her for a long while, said nothing, but that day, he took a new photo, and she was in it. Their love wasn't loud, nor filled with promises of forever, yet it was quietly profound. They wandered through rainy days in the old town, shared books, old songs, and unspoken dreams. He once said that when he took the final photograph of his life, he would take her to the farthest place, a place where only they and the light existed. But life is rarely kind to those who love too deeply. One day, he disappeared, without a word, without a goodbye, without a single message. Gone, as if he'd never existed. She searched everywhere, called him, wrote emails, even visited every place he had ever photographed. The silence was haunting. It wasn't until much later that she found out he had been living with a cruel illness. He chose to vanish before she ever knew, so no one would have to witness the fading. To him, that love was most beautiful when it was untouched by decay. She didn't cry much. But ever since he left, her eyes seemed to lose a part of their light. That unfinished love didn't fade, it simply settled deep in her heart, quiet and unmoving, like the final photograph that was never sent. After he left, she was no longer the girl she used to be. Everything around her continued as normal, lecture halls still bustled with students, her favorite cafe still played old Trin songs, and the late afternoons in the old town still glowed with soft sunlight, as if nothing had ever been lost. Only she was unusually quiet. No one knew that in her mind, a single question kept looping. Why? Why did he leave? Why didn't he say a word? Why let love become something one-sided? There were no answers. Not even in the last photo he sent, just a blotchy gray sky with a single line beneath it. Don't wait. But she waited anyway. She began a journey to find him, or at least, to find the meaning behind his leaving. She traveled to the cities he had once passed through, reread every journal entry, every line he'd scribbled on the back of a photograph. She met a few people from his past, but all they could say was, he liked to disappear and come back as if nothing happened. Along the way, she began to write. At first, just short notes, fragments of longing, dreams, or unanswered questions. But the more she wrote, the deeper she looked within herself and realized that the pain wasn't only from being left behind, but from believing love was unchanging. Once, while standing in a field of wild reeds where he had once taken photos, she broke down in tears. Quietly, with no one around, but for the first time, she let the grief pour out completely. Like a wound finally touched. Her search for him slowly became a journey back to herself. From the girl who only knew how to wait, she learned how to move forward. Not to forget, but to understand, a love that's real, even if unfinished, can still carry someone far, very far, from their own sorrow. She came back after nearly a year of wandering. She carried nothing with her but a few notebooks filled to the edges, some hastily taken photos, and eyes that no longer welled up when his name was mentioned. Something had changed, not because she had forgotten, but because she had made it all the way through the pain. One afternoon, while sorting through old belongings, she stumbled upon his old camera, the one he had gifted her on a past birthday, along with a note. If one day I'm no longer here, see the world through my eyes. She had never dared to touch it. But this time, her hands didn't tremble. She turned it on. In the memory card, a few unedited photos remained. The scenes were familiar, the old town, a wooden bridge, sunlight dissolving on the water, but the last photo made her breath catch. It was her, standing in profile under a sunbeam, reading a book, lips slightly pursed as if hiding a smile. It must have been taken long ago, back when they were still together. And in that moment, she understood. He hadn't left because he stopped loving her. He left because he loved her too much, so much that he couldn't bear for her to see him fading, weakening, disappearing day by day. He didn't want time to blur their love into something less than what it once was. That photo wasn't just a click of a shutter. It was the way he chose to preserve her, whole, beautiful, alive, just as their love had been. And it was also his final goodbye, silent, gentle, but heartbreakingly deep. In that moment, she didn't cry. She smiled a real smile. Because she finally understood. Love isn't always about holding on. Sometimes, love means letting go before the other person ever has to hurt. After that afternoon, she began to take photographs. At first, just ordinary moments, a coffee cup by the window, sunlight filtering through leaves, an old woman balancing a basket of goods as she crossed the street. But as she looked through the lens, she slowly began to understand why he had loved photography so deeply. It wasn't about capturing images. It was about holding on to feelings. That moment, that light, that single blink of an eye, it could hold an entire world. She no longer searched for him. And she no longer hoped he would return someday. Because, in a quiet and inexplicable way, he had never truly left. He was still there, in the way she saw the world, in every photo she took, in the sense of peace she felt whenever she remembered. One day, she returned to the place where they'd first met, the old photo exhibition. The gallery was mostly empty now, filled only with soft music and the faint scent of freshly printed paper. She stood for a long time in front of one photograph, the woman with her back turned, lost in the mist of dusk. Beneath it, a new inscription had been etched. Sometimes, the most beautiful kind of love is the one we can't hold on to. She didn't need to ask who had written it. She already knew. She left the gallery with a heart light as air. No more pain. No more regret. Just one thing remained, a deep, quiet gratitude for someone who had come into her life, loved her with everything he had, and then left gently, so that their love could stay forever in its most beautiful form. She returned to her everyday life, but she was no longer the girl from those old days. She had learned to live with her memories, not in them. That love, brief, unfinished, had given her something rare. The gift of living deeply, honestly, and gently with herself. Since that day, she began to live differently. No longer in a rush. No longer filled with doubt. Everything slowed down, like the way she chose the light for each photograph, or the way she quietly listened to the stories of others. She no longer tried to forget him. She kept him as something soft and gentle in her memory. Every now and then, in the middle of life's chaos, she would find herself pausing in front of a beautiful ray of sunlight, a stranger's face in a crowd, a fleeting laugh, and she'd ask herself, if it were him, would he have captured this moment? Then she'd smile, raise her camera, and press the shutter. On weekends, she started a small photography class for children. She taught them how to see the world with their hearts, something she had learned from him, not through words, but through the way he had once lived. She would tell them stories about an old friend who once said, "Some of the most beautiful things only happen once. Our job is to notice them before they pass us by." Every photo she took now had a name. Not to remember, but to tell a story. She wasn't afraid of losing things anymore, because she had come to understand, nothing truly disappears once it has touched someone's heart. Sometimes, on late nights, she still wrote. Still called his name in pages of a journal no one else would ever read. Not to hold on, but to say thank you. Thank you for loving her with such tenderness. Thank you for leaving at the right moment, so their love would never have the chance to fade. And just like that, she went on living. Not needing him beside her. Still remembering, still loving. But calmly, like the sky after rain, like a wound that is healed. The scar remains, but the pain is gone. That love story, though unfinished, was still the most beautiful thing she ever had. And perhaps, the most beautiful story I've ever been told. And that's the story that made me believe. Some love stories don't need to reach the end to become eternal. Not because they were complete, but because they were deep enough to change a person, beautiful enough to live on in the heart of the one who stayed behind. That love, though unfinished, was never a tragedy. It was a gift. A moment of being truly loved. A moment of placing your heart in someone else's hands without fear or calculation. And a moment of learning how to love, without needing to hold on. If you've ever lost someone halfway through the story, please don't see it as an ending. Maybe it's the beginning of a new version of yourself. One that is softer, wiser, and more grateful for everything that once was. Because love, even if it exists for only a moment, can be enough to give meaning to an entire lifetime. So keep living. To love and to remember. In the most beautiful way possible.